In 1963, the largest civil rights march in history took place in Washington, D.C. Crossing the bridge over the mighty Potomac, heading into Washington, D.C., there's the Lincoln Memorial. Washington is located where it is because it was geographically in the center of the United States, but it really marks the gateway to the South. You know, I was always afraid to go to the South because the South, for a black person, is the home of racism, the Klan, segregation, but it was also the home of the Civil Rights Movement and the home of the greatest civil rights leader of all, Dr. Martin Luther King. And it was here that he gave the greatest speech of his life in August of 1963 when he said that, "I have a dream."
We will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
I'm heading south, something I'd never dreamed I'd do as a child, to find out how the South has changed since Dr. King's assassination in 1968. What's become of his dream of racial integration? Slavery ended in 1865, but life for black people in the South remained a nightmare of poverty and terror. Racial segregation was the law of the land. Black men could be lynched capriciously, arbitrarily. We used to joke that southern cities had a sign that said, "Nigger, read and run. And if you can't read, run anyway." Millions did, fleeing north for a better life. Ironically, a century later, black people in the hundreds of thousands are flocking back. I was in Washington at the site of Dr. King's famous speech to meet a man I hope could explain this surprising development, the actor Morgan Freeman.
Forget about it. Right. No.
Morgan was born in Memphis. Like many of his neighbors, his family migrated to Chicago when he was a boy. And yet, despite his wealth and fame, he has chosen to return to the South and make his home in Mississippi.
So people asked me when I went home to live after becoming this major persona, and good Lord.
What is wrong with you?
You can live anywhere in the world you want to. Why you come here? I said, because I can live anywhere in the world I want to. That's why. This is home. This is where my roots are. This is where my parents are buried. This is where I've always felt safest.
But what is it about the South that's different for a black person than the North or the West?
I think we built the South, and we know it. I do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, what I own in the South isn't because I went and bought it. What I own is my place there. Because my mother, my father, my grandmother, my grandfather, my great-grandmother, my great-grandfather, great-great-grandmother, great-great-grandfather, I mean, all the way back to my great-great-great-grandmother, who happened to be a Virginian. That's where they had the farms. You know? Either that or they got her off a ship. But,
right.
Yeah, I don't see that anything traveling around the country and living in different places, I could never see that any place was better racially than Mississippi.
You never experienced racism as a kid in the South?
Yes, of course I did. That's not the point. Whether I experienced racism in the South is not it.
Right.
It's where else did I experience it.
Right, like in the North.
Yeah, you know, it's, I don't care anything about experiencing racism in the South. I don't and won't now.
No, right.
So.
But our image of the South was not of a nurturing place. I mean, the image that I was raised with of the South was it's a place of the Klan,
Yeah.
a place of racism.
Yeah, you weren't going to find any less racism.
In the North.
No. It's going to be more insidious and more painful. Because you're given to think that, oh, it's different here.
You're free, boy.
Right, right.
So you'll be buried there?
Oh, yeah, yeah. My mother and father are buried right there in front of the house.
Oh, they are?
Oh, yeah.
This is your home place?
Yeah.
Oh, so you went back to your home place?
I went back to home.
Wow, man. Very few of us can do that.
Yeah, it's true. But those of us who can and do will be, I think, will be very pleased in later years when they sit on the front porch with a rocking chair, eat watermelon, fan the flies, and say, why did we give this up in the first place?
I have to confess that I was surprised by Morgan's deep affection for the South. If I didn't respect him so much, I would have thought he was whistling Dixie. To find out for myself what this new South was like, I decided to make my own migration, starting at Morgan's birthplace, Memphis, situated on the banks of the Mississippi River. Memphis, Tennessee, home of the blues, of B.B. King, even of Elvis, was one of the front lines in the battle for civil rights. Dr. King marched here in 1968 to support the sanitation workers. It was here that he was assassinated. For many of us, the Lorraine Motel where he was slain is sacred ground. This was the room where Dr. King spent his last night. He slept here and Ralph Abernathy slept there. And he left the room exactly like it was right after he was shot. There were crushed cigarettes there, which is a real surprise given our ethos today. And cups of coffee half full. The bed turned down the way he got out. Dr. King was standing here with his friends. He was shot from that little window over there, those three windows, the one on the right, rimmed in white. He fell backwards here, and all this, of course, was covered with blood. And there's a famous photograph of all of his friends pointing to that little window as the place where the shot came from. And a whole movement, a 100-year-old movement, could be ended with one bullet shot from that window up there. It's pow, just like that. Dr. King's life ended in Memphis, but did his dream of a fully integrated America die with him? To find out, I asked a man who has spent the last 40 years fighting for racial equality in this city, the mayor of Memphis, Willie Harrington.
When I was 28 or 29 years old, I marched with Dr. King on behalf of the sanitation workers, and we wore this sign saying, "I am a man." Now, I was about 28, and I had this sign on me. Mm-hmm. The reason we had to say we were men was because of the way we were treated less than men. Mm-hmm. After
a career as an educator and a political activist, Dr. Harrington became Memphis's first black mayor. Since 1991, he served 3 terms in office, and now he's running for a 4th term. Did you ever, in your wildest dreams, think that you would be the man at City Hall?
You know, obviously, I never thought that I'd be on the inside of this building as the mayor. When in the civil rights movement, I was outside protesting against the mayor because Memphis was a mean-spirited city. It was similar to many other southern cities. I remember one evening, a white man got on a bus and forced my mother and me to get up. We were at the middle of the bus, and he said, "Hey, girl," he said, "you know, you're not supposed to be sitting here." And my mother and I, we got up, and we sat farther in the back of the bus. I remember the separate water fountains, I remember going in the back of restaurants. I mean, you couldn't go in the front. The theaters, you had to go in the side doors, or you had to go upstairs. You couldn't go in the front of theaters. If you wanted to try on garments for size, you could not do that if you were black.
Where were you when you heard the news Dr. King had been shot?
Oh, man, I was driving back to the inner city of Memphis. I had my radio on to a black radio station, and then it came on. It said, we have bad news. Dr. King was not only shot, but he has died. And I remember I was just overwhelmed, with emotion. I couldn't believe that, because I had seen him in Mason Temple. It might have been the night before, or a couple of nights, when he gave that speech that, I've been to the mountain.
It was the night before.
It was the night before. I was in the church at Mason Temple.
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead.
I didn't know that was going to be the last time that I'd hear him speak.
Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
There was no other human figure like Dr. Martin Luther King. He moved the conscience of America. And all of a sudden, he's assassinated in our city, in Memphis. This is the city where I was born. Now, this event could have occurred in any American city, but it occurred in Memphis. So I've often said that if there's any city in America that should accentuate the values and the principles that Dr. King stood for, it should be Memphis.
One of the most dramatic examples of how Memphis has embraced the ideals of Dr. King is the transformation of its police force. During the Civil Rights era, the police in the South were symbols of institutional racism, brutality, and terror. They were the official face of white oppression. Even today, I'm always frightened when I see a flashing police car speeding up behind me. Like many black people growing up here, James Bolden was terrified of the police. But in 1968, he joined the Memphis Police Department, determined to change things. He was one of only 65 black officers in a force of 2,000. Today, he's the chief. You're 20 years old, and it's just a few months after Dr. King's assassinated. What was the force like?
It was male, white, dominated. When I came on the job, we didn't have many aspirations of ever achieving any type of rank or anything like that, because commanding officers of black, as far as that concerned, were practically non-existent. So we didn't see very much in form of role models or anything like that of blacks holding positions in the Memphis Police Department. We had certain areas of the city in which, we could patrol, and others we couldn't.
You couldn't, even as a police officer?
Even as a police officer, we were assigned to certain areas within the city, and generally they were areas that were occupied by the black community, and we didn't police outside of that community.
In 1973, Bolden founded the Afro-American Police Association to make the police a force against racism, not an example of it. He petitioned the federal government to get more blacks hired and promoted to executive positions.
It wasn't met, with open arms. There were white officers who refused to ride in a squad car with me. There were black officers who would turn their backs on me but wouldn't speak to me because they were afraid that I would bring trouble to them.
Were you worried that maybe an accident might befall you from some of your white colleagues?
That was with me every day. Every day. I was I would go to work, and sometimes you can't imagine getting home at night. You're so terrified, you know, because who wouldn't be when you had to face something like that and everyone is walking around you, they're wearing guns.
When did you know that you were winning? I mean, how did you build consensus? How did you melt down some of these old crackers and make them start to accept what you were trying to do?
Around the year of 1978, finally the federal government agreed that there had been discrimination in the Memphis Police Department. And a consent decree was entered by the city.
It took 5 years to admit what you could observe in 5 seconds, right?
Yeah. So as a result of the increase in hiring of minorities, more opportunities began to open up. You look at the City of Memphis Police Department now, I have 2 deputy chiefs that work under my command that are African Americans. Our precincts throughout the city are equally divided. We have women in leadership positions in the police department. You cannot find an area within the Memphis Police Department where minorities or blacks are not represented. Things have changed so dramatically in the South. You know, I've had the distinction of living through the times when we could not drink at a water fountain, when we could not go to the library on a certain day, when we couldn't go to a movie, and when we couldn't eat at a restaurant. So for anyone to say that the South has not changed, then they're fooling themselves.
You might want to lead us in prayer.
In just 30 years, the police and the city government of Memphis have been able to make profound changes. But is that true of all institutions in the South? This is Fort Benning, Georgia, home to over 30,000 raw recruits. .26% of the United States Army is black, but historically, the military was just as segregated as the police, and as a society it was charged to defend. Today, the Army boasts that it's an army of one. I asked Lieutenant Colonel Sando if the Army is as integrated as it claims. What's this Rogues Gallery for?
This is the battalion leadership. Our chaplain, Chaplain Stokeland, a black female.
Right, not bad.
The only one I've ever seen in our Army, and she does a great job for us. Our personnel officer, our operations officer, our supply officer, and then 6 company commanders and their first sergeants.
Man, a lot of color on that wall.
Within our battalion, I have 6 companies. 2 of my company commanders are black. Of the 6 first sergeants, 3 of them are black. Of the 5 battalions here in the Infantry Training Brigade, 1 of the battalion commanders is black. 3 of the command sergeant majors are black. From my experience, for 21 years now, commissioned service, is that I truly believe that the Army is colorblind. I truly believe that I'm colorblind. We reward excellence regardless of race, color, or creed. We promote soldiers and officers based on merit and demonstrated potential.
How can the Army achieve such spectacular results in terms of this colorblind society that you described? I mean, how does it work? The Army was notoriously racist. My father was in the Army during World War II. I mean, he had horror stories when I was growing up. And now the Army's held up as a model for what a colorblind society could be. How did you guys do that?
Well, I can't speak for the previous 50 years of racial integration. The armed forces were the first institution in our country to be racially integrated. So
under President Truman.
Yes, sir. So for no other reason than we had to make it work, and we're going to make it work.
To make this work, each barracks is assigned an equal opportunity officer to deal directly with any race complaints. The Army as a whole may claim that it's colorblind, but what about the individuals who make it up? Can the Army change the racial attitudes that recruits bring with them? And what about white recruits from the South?
I grew up, you know, 1st through 5th grades with all white kids in the neighborhood, all white kids in my class. So you know, depending on where these kids come from today, they may have grown up in a similar situation. You know, rural Midwest, and you know, there's nothing but white kids out there, and that's who they're going to go to school with. And maybe they haven't lived with people from different races or different, you know, socioeconomic backgrounds or religious affiliations. You know, one thing we do, you know, I tell the parents when during family days, you know, we get the soldiers, we give them a haircut, we give them a uniform, and then we put them in a room with 60 of their closest friends and ask them to get along. Are there some difficulties? Absolutely. It's hard enough to share a bathroom with a brother or 2 brothers. To share a bathroom with 60 kids, you know, there's some growing up that has to go on.
It's a nightmare, man.
So that's part of it. And they realize that they will succeed as a group or they will not succeed as a group, and that they have to take care of each other.
But the men call you Sergeant. Lieutenant Colonel Sando's right-hand man is Sergeant Major Wilcox. I wanted to ask a black man if attitudes had really changed. But what about this, Sergeant Major?
That's a Confederate flag. I'm personally offended by that. You know, it don't represent me as a black American because I think it's got the wrong symbol.
Will this person be a member of the infantry?
This soldier's he's a officer, which I got to figure out who that truck belongs to.
Yeah, you got another one in there under the mirror. That boy got a bag.
So I will deal with him when I figure out who car that is. And I think it may be one of my cadets though. So I'm gonna deal with him.
Okay. How long have you been in the Army?
24 years.
Okay, break it down for me, brother to brother. You hear all this stuff about the Army, no more racism, you know, it's a model society. Is that true?
I tell you, it's not visibly seen. I came from Georgia, and I came from an environment where racism was everyday way of life. And the way I've grown to the military is leaps and bounds from where my brothers are down in South Georgia today. And so I'm grateful for the military. The military itself is a good place, but you still got people in the military, such as the young man with the flag on, who have not made the mental change. They can't do it openly. It's subverted. It's underneath, and you can sense it. And you see it there, but you got to root it out.
I had a soldier when I was a company commander 15 years ago, a white soldier, and he had a black platoon sergeant. And he was having trouble with that. And he told me flat out, he says, my daddy told me I didn't have to listen to a black man. He was told that. And I couldn't, you know, I'm not going to tell him, you know, talk bad about his father to him. But I said, well, look, you know, that's not acceptable here. Okay, that we're not going to, you know, he is your platoon sergeant, he is your superior, and you're obliged to obey him. We all share a common oath to support and defend the Constitution and obey the orders of the officers appointed over me. You have to do that, son. You're going to have to figure out how to deal with that. All right?
And what did he say?
Yes, sir. And went on. Now, did I change what he, you know, the way he felt about his father? Probably not. Did I give him another perspective on life and the fact that we were not going to accept that behavior? You know, I can't change his attitude, what he's going to think, but I can certainly change how that attitude is manifested in his behavior.
In this job here, we try to not only train these guys, we've been challenged to take all the abnormal behavior that society has taught them and turn them around.
That's a lot of work, brother.
Psychologically, we do wonders in 14 weeks. We talk about men who have died on the battlefield to give us our freedom and how all that blood is red. There's no colors, there's no boundaries. Every man on the battlefield are brothers. And that man you left, no matter what color he is, no matter where you come from, he's your brother.
What happens if somebody's busting your buns, right? And so you're pissed off. Yeah. And so you want to call them a name, under your breath even. So instead of saying you MF, you go, you nigger. And you hear that. What do you do, Sergeant Major?
That guy goes to my office. And that guy is looked at very straightforwardly as being a racist. And I would probably deal with him personally as a sergeant major. And then if he'd definitely get Article 15, he'd definitely get punished, he'd lose money in his paycheck. And as a minimum, and a maximum, he can be discharged off that one statement.
You make him do 10 million push-ups and stuff like that?
Well, what the drill sergeant do is probably a little more than what I do. But I tell you that it's a serious allegation, and you can't not deal with it. If you don't deal with it, it becomes okay to do. Whether it be between you and I as buds talking on the field, and as society do, people often use that language. And I say to anybody, no matter who uses it and where they use it, it's still degrading language. Don't use it at all.
So even two black people can't use it?
Exactly. It's degrading language.
So far, so good. In institutions like the Army, the police, the mayor's office, where integration is enforced, there has been dramatic progress in race relations. But what about in the hearts of the people? Their deepest attitudes about race? How far has Dr. King's dream been realized here? I headed to Birmingham, Alabama to find out. Dr. King called Birmingham the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. And that was saying quite a lot, given the extent of segregation throughout the South. It was here in 1963 that white supremacists bombed the all-black 16th Street Baptist Church, killing 4 little girls. It was only in May of 2002 that a man responsible for the bombing was convicted. I can't believe I'm standing so close to the 16th Street Baptist Church. I was 13 years old. And I was sitting in the living room with my parents, and we got the news on the television that it had been blown up and that children, I mean, people my age, had been killed. And I think that the civil rights movement came into my life, came into my living room that day in a way that was scarcely imaginable otherwise. People like me, you know, people in school like me, were being killed, were made martyrs. I'm in the middle of Birmingham. I just got here, and this is a monument to the civil rights movement. Birmingham was a metaphor for all that was wrong about the South and segregation. It was the symbol of the heart of darkness, the evil of white racism, of white supremacy. It was the front line for the movement itself. King knew they could win in Birmingham, then they could win throughout the South. Understandably, Birmingham has worked hard to bury its past. Today, it's a thriving service city of nearly 1 million people, a third of whom are black. It has a black mayor, an integrated workforce, and a growing black middle class. On the face of it, at least, Birmingham is a totally new city. And perhaps there are few examples of racial progress in Alabama more dramatic than Laura, Chris, and their 6-month-old daughter, Aria. Chris and Laura both grew up in the South. They met 2 years ago in college, where they are music majors. What's it like being an interracial couple in Birmingham, Alabama at this time?
Well, for the most part, I suppose it's like being any other couple in Birmingham. Sometimes you tend to feel the things that people aren't saying. If you're out, you kind of feel the people looking at you, checking you out. And once in a while, if I'm by myself, and this can be a white person or a black person, they'll look at her, and they'll look at us. They notice enough of a resemblance to think that she's my daughter, but they want to know, is her mother white? And you see the look of concern on their face.
Did anybody give you a hard time, I mean, in the community or in your family?
His black girlfriends did, as in, you know, how are you, or they'd say to me, how can you steal the good black men from us? Or, you know, they were mad at him for leaving behind all the great black women he grew up with, as in it was a slam against them.
They seem to kind of feel like, well, you know, why would you date this white girl? And there's so many black girls, perfectly good black girls to date, and and almost this kind of thing that they have the fact that she's white against her.
But do you ever think about the fact that he would have been lynched for sleeping with you 20 years ago, 30 years ago?
I have thought about that. It is I don't know if I should say humbling or what kind of experience it is to think that once upon a time, you know, they would come and get me and drag me out of my house for having this family. And as much as I would like to think that no one would, you know, bury a cross in my yard and set it on fire in this day and age, you know, ever so often you hear those instances of somebody getting drugged down the highway, chained to the back of a car, or, you know, some policeman or policemen just beating somebody senseless for seemingly no reason. So, you know, it does tend to, it's one of those things that you don't want to, I mean, I'm definitely not going to dwell on it. Mm-hmm. But there are those moments when you think about these kinds of things and like, wow, you know.
I kind of feel like he's worth it, so whatever drawbacks there are, then I tend to think in confrontation, you know, walk away, and whatever you want to be mad about, you be mad about it in your corner, and I'm going to be happy in my corner, because I am happy when I go home. Whether or not I have a conversation with a grandmother who doesn't agree with it, or a person on the street that wants to stare at me funny, I'm still coming home, and I'm still happy when I get home. So, but with her, I have to be particular about who's going to look at me funny in an all-black neighborhood and look at her and say something.
Would you raise your child in the South?
No.
You know, I would very much love to get her out of the South where she's not going to be as prone to, or just in some area where there's a little bit more diversity in experience. So she would have had enough white friends or Hispanic friends or Mexican friends at 4 and 5 and 7 years old, that whatever her experiences are, whatever feelings she's going to develop, it's not so bottled, you know, those kinds of really narrow-minded experiences.
Will the South ever be a place in your lifetime where race won't matter?
In my lifetime?
Wow. I mean, Martin Luther King didn't think that, you know, he's not alive now, but I'm sure he hoped this would happen. I mean, if people believe that it's not going to happen, then it's certainly not going to happen. We're going to sit here in the exact same society that we live in. Like, I mean, everybody makes those small steps. Like Chris, I started dating him. He got me really into gospel music. I was like, well, I'm a singer, I can join the gospel choir. Everybody's like, well, you're a white girl. I'm like, yes, I know, but if I hadn't have done that, I bet you the rest of my life I would have gone thinking they wouldn't let me in there. I was white. I might as well not even try.
The fact that Chris and Laura can openly build a family here is certainly a sign of change. Even if some attitudes toward interracial marriage among both blacks and whites are still entrenched in the past. The fact remains that mixed-race couples are still rare in the South. Astonishingly, interracial marriage only became legal in Alabama in the year 2000. But does this resistance to mixed marriage extend to other areas of personal choice?
As we come together today, we remember the need for peace on the streets of Birmingham.
Dr. King once said that the most segregated time in America was at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning. Which is why I was intrigued to hear about an interracial church in the heart of Birmingham, the Church of the Reconciler, founded by the Reverend Lawton Higgs.
Bless all of your children. Give us the capacity to be instruments of your peace.
Born in Arkansas, Lawton Higgs moved to Birmingham in 1966.
You know, I was a racist in those days.
You were racist?
Oh, yeah. I was not a violent man, but I definitely concurred with the view that black people are less than human.
You did?
Yes, for sure. And that they needed to stay in their place and that they would ruin things if they got involved with that. I had no relationships with any black people.
What made you change?
Well, I read Martin King's letter from the Birmingham City Jail and Seminary, and that broke my heart. I cried for about 3 days. I discovered I was, in opposition to God.
Reverend Higgs established the Church of the Reconciler 10 years ago, after previous attempts to integrate his all-white church were met with hostility by his parishioners. Reverend Higgs won a special commendation from President Clinton for his work with race relations. But outside of Birmingham's homeless and the poor, he has struggled to attract a large congregation. Apparently, 11 o'clock on Sunday morning still is the most segregated hour in America.
But why is it important for the congregations to be mixed?
Because if we don't integrate, we don't know one another. If we don't know one another, we're afraid of one another. If we're afraid of one another, we're going to hate one another. And if we hate one another, James Baldwin's Fire Next Time is right down the road.
Mm-hmm. Many of my friends choose to live in predominantly black neighborhoods with other well-educated black people. So what's wrong with that?
Well, nothing more wrong with that than white folks choosing to live in white neighborhoods with white folks. It's segregation.
But good Lord, it's got to be much better than it was in the days of Dr. King.
Yes, because they won't kill you.
You're a man of God. Is that true?
That's true. That's the major change that's taken place. And in other words, the segregation is not enforced by active violence, and that active violence is no longer acceptable. And that is a glorious gift of God.
In partnership with the Prince of Peace, Roman Catholic Church, sharing our common meal, let's give God and them a big hand.
I had heard mostly optimistic things about race relations in Birmingham. It's held up as a city of great racial progress. And to hear Reverend Higgs talk about it at the level of the spiritual, the level of who goes to church together, where they go to church, where they live, how welcome people would feel, how slow the rate of progress has been, was quite a surprise.
So let's raise the roof today and sing thanks to God. Y'all join me. God our Savior, God our Savior.
It would be marvelous if the transformation in race relations in the South could be most clearly symbolized by what's happening in Birmingham. But it doesn't sound, judging from the commentary of Reverend Higgs, that that's the way it is yet.
My last stop in my own migration through the South is its spiritual capital, Atlanta, Georgia, the birthplace of Martin Luther King, home to over 1 million African Americans, and home to my daughter Liza, a student at historically black Spelman College. And there in the King's Highway sits a figure veiled and bowed, by which the traveler's footsteps hasten as they go. On the tainted air broods fear. 3 centuries' thought has been the raising and unveiling of that bowed human heart. And now behold a century new for the duty and the deed. The problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. When W.E.B. Du Bois, the greatest black intellectual of his time, wrote those words a full century ago, he could scarcely imagine that running straight through the center of Atlanta, the King's Highway would be named after a black man. And that city, Atlanta, would be the Mecca of the black middle class. This neighborhood, known affectionately as Sweet Auburn, was home to a large black middle class that has given America a series of outstanding religious, political, and intellectual leaders for well over a century. Most notable among these was Dr. King himself. The house where he was born still stands here, as does the church where he began his ministry. Today, Atlanta's mayor is a black woman, Atlanta boasts one of the highest concentrations of black-owned companies in America. Atlanta is heralded as the place where middle-class black people can enjoy the same standards of living as their white counterparts and retain their property values. As a result, middle-class black families from all over the North are migrating here in the tens of thousands. Has Atlanta, Georgia really become Dr. King's promised land?
There's so many people moving out to this area and building $1 million and homes over 500,000 in this area.
Mrs. Carmen Johnson is a realtor in Atlanta's wealthy suburbs. Mrs. Johnson helps northern middle-class black migrants realize their dreams of returning to the New South. She took me to see the kind of properties black people are buying.
This is Sandstone Estates. This is our premier subdivision of DeKalb County. And this is very culturally diverse. This house here belongs to a doctor, a single female doctor at Emory.
Wow, sister doing
and
well.
She's about right at 600,000.
How many homes in this division?
48 homes in this subdivision. We have CNN news anchor that lives in here. We have recording artists that live in here, Kelly Price and Montel Jordan. I can't actually point to their houses because I do work with a lot of celebrities, and their privacy is protected.
And all these owners are, as we say, culturally diverse.
Yes, they are, of color.
Mrs. Johnson took me to see a home that she's just put on the market, her own.
Gwinnett County, and it's known for its school district.
After you.
Thank you.
Now, how far from central Atlanta are we?
We are approximately 30 miles from central Atlanta.
Okay.
We're now in the foyer, and we have the cove ceilings above and the crystal chandeliers.
Wow.
This is the bathroom area with a steam shower. It has the full walk-in double heads.
Gee, what's this tile?
That is mosaic limestone.
Mosaic limestone. How much is this for sale?
$850,000.
$850,000.
Right. That's still for 8,100 square foot of new construction here in Atlanta. This is actually a 5-bedroom, 5-bath home. The standard building a square foot in this area runs about $150 a square foot, and you would be getting this house roughly about $110 a square foot.
Gee.
And this is the kitchen and the keeping room.
The keeping room?
The keeping room.
What do we keep in the keeping room?
We keep the family in the keeping room while we're cooking dinner.
Oh, that's nice.
And that is the breakfast room overlooking the water. Right now, this is the guest suite, one of the guest suites, with a huge walk-in closet.
Man, I had apartments not this big. Now, for this neighborhood, is $850 reasonable price, upper end, middle, or what?
It would be at the high end of this neighborhood, but I have the best lake lot in the area, and all of them have their own suites.
How many black people live in this neighborhood?
Well, you know, I am not allowed to answer that. Realtors are governed by the Antitrust Act, and we are not allowed to give information based on sex, race, or creed.
Okay. Let me ask you another question.
Okay.
Do you know any black people live around here?
I'm not allowed to answer that.
I can ask you that as a resident, can I?
No, you can't.
You can't?
You'd have to come back on a Saturday and watch people mowing the lawn and the kids playing out in the yards.
And then see.
And then see for yourself.
All right. You know any white people living here?
So what Mrs. Johnson is saying, or isn't saying, is that most of these so-called culturally diverse neighborhoods are in fact all black neighborhoods. Is it this that has made Atlanta the mecca of the black middle class? All black schools, all black country clubs, all black churches, in all black and wealthy neighborhoods.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey, how are you?
Just fine.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for letting me come into your home.
Oh, you're welcome. We've heard so much about you.
Deidre and Gerald Wolf are a professional couple from Detroit, Michigan. They moved to this Atlanta suburb with their 2 sons 2 years ago.
Straight ahead, this is the family room.
Gee, look at that entertainment unit. That's bad.
Yeah, that was actually custom made for our old house, and so one of the things we looked at was we had to have an 11-foot, at least 11-foot wall with no windows or doors.
Where was your old house?
In West Bloomfield, Michigan.
Oh, in Michigan.
Deidre is an attorney, and Gerald is a manager for an Atlanta power company. What drew them here?
Why would you two want to leave the North and move to the South, and specifically move to Atlanta?
I was a college athlete, and when I was leaving high school, one of the things that I had in my mind was I wasn't going anywhere south. The stories that I heard about the South, I certainly didn't want to be a part of. And it was just those old stereotypes that you had about white folks in the South.
Right, what?
Like black people didn't treat you fairly. You would get killed. You would get abused. You'd be treated in a very mean fashion. So I did not want to come south. And I got the opportunity at the gas company here. And I weighed, you know, the things that I held in my mind. There were some friends that I had here, and they kind of helped convince me that it really wasn't what I was thinking.
But the fact that it was Atlanta, that made all the difference in the world, because I had a lot of friends here. Atlanta has a tremendous reputation for being the place where blacks want to be. It's like the Mecca. And so that's how we kind of decided to come here. Him, the job opportunity, and me, yeah, this is a good place.
You used an interesting phrase. You said that for many black people, Atlanta is a Mecca, a magnet drawing people.
It is.
Why do you think that's so?
You know, a lot of blacks that are here and doing well. And then there's just so many black professionals here. I mean, being here already, I can tell a big difference. For instance, we know, you know, neighbors and friends, countless doctors and lawyers and other professionals, CEOs, and I mean, we play tennis and our kids go to school together, and that's something that we didn't have in other places.
In other places you lived in white neighborhoods?
Yes, we lived in predominantly white neighborhoods where it would be maybe, you know, like in our last subdivision, it was 9 black families. But we wanted a nice house. We wanted nice grocery stores. We wanted to live near the nice bookstore and the Starbucks coffee and the Einstein bagel and all of the nice amenities and restaurants that come. Typically, they're in white communities. We wanted to feel safe. You know, we didn't want a high crime rate. And so Atlanta was the place that I saw where, you know, you could go into a $300,000 range, a $400,000 range, a $500,000 up to $1 million, and have an entire gated community subdivision and be all black. So why not? I mean, then your children have playmates. They have role models. They have examples. I mean, they have traditional families.
But this is the home of Martin Luther King. This is one of the birthplaces of the civil rights movement. White people who were defending their right to live in white neighborhoods used to say almost exactly what you just said. We want to keep our neighborhood pure because we want people who embrace the same values, and these colored people don't have the same values. So if I'm being devil's advocate, how would you respond to that? What if somebody said to you, but you're being racist? You know, none but black people in this neighborhood. I want some white people in here.
But that's, okay, go ahead.
Okay, let me answer. I respond to that as saying, I did not say that a white person could not come into this neighborhood. As a matter of fact, it's a matter of choice. It's open to anybody. Their money is just as green as mine. The same dead presidents are on the face of those dollar bills. And if they want, it's freedom of choice in this country. I
see white people at the model looking. I do.
Oh, you do? The model home, the sample home.
The model home, the sample home. So they come and they look and then they drive around and they keep on driving around and keep on driving around. They probably peek at the pool and then they going out. You know, but why do they do that? I mean, like I said, up until 2 years ago, we've always lived in an all-white community. So the fact that they come and they see blacks, they're driven away. We were never driven away. So, you know, just like we have the choice to integrate or not to integrate, but we don't have to integrate.
Right.
Stay down, shorty.
The right of families like the Wolfs to choose where they wanted to live was a cornerstone of the civil rights movement. But in the 60s, this meant the right to integrate white neighborhoods, not forming all black neighborhoods. And this trend is strong and growing. In the last decade alone, Atlanta's black population has grown by nearly 500,000. Is this really the new South that was envisioned by the civil rights movement? Before I end my journey, I want to talk with another Atlanta resident, someone who knew Dr. King personally and who marched in his movement, the legendary writer Maya Angelou.
I think a lot of the civil rights movement and the evening up of the playing field, that freed people from the imprisonment of dislocation in the North and West. And they began to look south again and see it. I think that all this movement, this population reversal, began with the civil rights movement.
It's almost as if you're saying that, ironically, and I never thought about this before, that our people have been in exile in the North for 3/4 of a century, and now are coming home.
Yes, I am saying that.
One of the surprises to me has been that in some of the most affluent neighborhoods in Atlanta, black people have chosen to live with other affluent black people.
I think a thinking person would see that propensity as very natural. Martin King told a story that after the Montgomery bus boycott and the companies capitulated and agreed, that a black woman got onto the bus and walked all the way back and sat in the back seat. And a young man who had been so adamant, you know, voter registration, so adamant, boycott the buses, so adamant. He went back, he said, "Ma'am, excuse me, we have walked 18 months or whatever so that you don't have to sit here." She said, "Son, I walked with you. But now that I can sit anywhere, I'm sitting in the back. It's much more comfortable. I have more room. Put my bags down, stretch my legs out."
That's great. 100 years ago, black people begged, borrowed, and stole to get out of the South. They used any means necessary to escape the racism and economic oppression that was associated with the white racism in this area. And now, at the beginning of a new century, to the astonishment, I think, of everybody, black people are flocking back to the South. And they're doing it with alacrity. They're doing it with a sense of spirituality and passion and commitment to our history and to our people.
I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream.
But something else is happening too. The black people migrating back to the South, given the choice and the opportunities for integration, are opting to live with people in their own class who look like them, leading to a new kind of segregation.
My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream.
Now, here I am, sitting so close to the body of my hero, Martin Luther King. When you think about all that Dr. King lived for and what he died for. And in a word, that vision was integration. And I can't help but wonder what Dr. King
would think of this whole thing.
This program was made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.